So today, Incremental Development Alliance is working with the city of South Tucson on providing this presentation for urban design. We've been working with the city of South Tucson since, I don't know, earlier, basically since the start of 2021. We've done several different activities from a market analysis to stakeholder review and looking deeper into the city of South Tucson zoning as we're trying to lower the barriers to small scale development in both retail and residential. So part of that discussion is looking at what good urban design elements exactly are. And for that reason, our lead on this is Neil Heller, who's been participating with us from the get-go, and he will share some basic elements to good urban design, and then that will be compared by our own local architect, Bob Vint, who has really extensive knowledge. So I'll go ahead and give a formal introduction for you both now. Let's see here. Neil Heller is an urban designer and planner with a focus on aligning municipal regulations with the kind of development outcomes a community wants to see. This is accomplished using a real estate development pro forma-based approach that quantifies the physical and financial effects of various policy decisions. With a strong background in design, urban planning, housing policy, and real estate development, Neil brings value to communities through user-focused site design, equitable housing policy, pro forma-based scenarios, and supporting projects through adoption. Neil crafted the baseline 3D model building plans, site plans, and accompanying pro formas to be used as the starting point for conversations with the focus groups and provide clear example models to explore opportunities and constraints and construction considerations, capital structure, lending and underwriting, and context-sensitive site planning. As a small landlord himself, he is familiar with the regulatory operations and maintenance for 2 to 4 unit buildings through the renovation of a duplex and the addition of a basement suite and accessory dwelling unit using owner-occupied financing. He's a long-time, practically driven advocate in Portland for changing zoning and related regulations to unlock new opportunities for increasing housing supply in the city. He was recently featured in the prominent Northwest-based think tank blog Sightline for his work to provide financial justification towards political action for increasing the number of units allowed on typical single-dwelling lots, owned and managed by nonprofits seeking to provide housing affordability. So with that introduction, we'll have Neil get started, and then when Neil's finished, I'll go ahead and introduce our local architect, Bob Vint. Go ahead, Neil. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Let's see how I can share my slides here.
Yep. Oh, let me fix that. Good to go.
So I think this should capture the full slides, and let me know if how's that working for you all?
Looks fine.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great, excellent. So urban design for the future, as we are working in South Tucson and we're talking about how there might be updates in the future to zoning codes, there might be, there's a bus rapid transit being planned for the area. There are small developers looking to do projects in the areas. We can talk about how urban design for the future probably looks a lot like the urban design of the past, but now it'll be responding to new challenges, demographic shifts, and new technologies. But it turns out that humans have been perfecting how to build cities for millennia. We've kind of figured this thing out. We've been doing it for a while, and it's really only been maybe the past 80 to 90 years that we've been experimenting with some new ways, and some of these new ways in these experiments have proven unsuccessful. And so there's a little bit of a push maybe to get back to what works. And so let me talk a little bit about that, about what the future might look like. When we talk about changing demographics, We're also talking about changing values. There's two cohorts currently, the boomer generation and the millennial generation have converged, and they are desiring the same sort of living environments. They want walkable, livable neighborhoods. And so that is changing the way that real estate is responding. So when we talk about changing market factors, when the future of home ownership looks like this trend here, and you see it trending downward out to 2050, even as low as I think Arthur C. Nelson predicts a 53% ownership rate by 2050. We can envision a future that is responding to that, and how the built environment looks different because of this. And I think it looks like one with a little bit more density and more attached units in attached unit varieties. And the reason for this are more stringent underwriting standards since the Great Recession. There is reduced confidence in the public that their home is going to continue to increase in equity. I think the recession showed people that sometimes home prices bottom out. Now we've seen that they have recovered, but there's also a desire in younger generations to be more mobile and not be tied down to buying a house. In this new economy, they may work a gig for a year and then go somewhere else and pick up another job. So having that 30-year same neighborhood type approach just isn't part of that mindset. In addition to this, we're looking at stagnating household incomes. I don't know that household incomes have increased all too much from the 70s, but we've seen housing prices increase dramatically. And so there's a divergence in what houses cost and what people can afford. Not to mention crippling student debt loans, and then an increase in multi-generational living, because there are housing challenges. Folks are deciding to live together, and because of that and adding more space, they're starting to think about how their living and their working environment might change than what we typically see in a single family house. So let's kind of take a look and see how some of this looks, right? Because it's urban design. On the left here, we are looking at a diagram from the early turn of the century, the 1900s, that talks about, this is just the theoretical arrangement of how a city or a neighborhood should look. And the idea is that you have a lot of things, within a reasonable distance of where you live. You've got amenities like schools and community centers and parks, churches, and places to go shopping, right? And then when we look on the right, we kind of see this experiment that I'm talking about that sort of gave rise in the post-World War II auto-dominated design that flourished because of the government providing massive subsidy for housing, and led to a lot of suburban outgrowth. So this is urban design at the city level, and it's not necessarily something that a small developer controls, because some of this is dictated by how our zoning codes changed over time and adapted to these new ways, this experiment. And zoning will set the boundaries of what can be built or how it might look, but what is actually built on the ground, that's going to be determined by the developer. And this is why we need more local small scale developers creating a more valuable alternative. So there's a theory in urban design surrounding how far people will walk to get their basic needs. And they call it the ped shed. So it's basically a 5 to 10 minute walk. And this theory states that your weekly needs should be within a 5-minute walk of where you live. I think that's a bit idealized. Some folks have maybe expanded that a little bit and suggested that right now in America, it would be really nice to be able to, even if we could get that to the 10-minute, or now there's a new term going around called the 15-minute city. So 10 minutes on a bike is pretty close. 10 minutes on a walk isn't so bad. So let's talk about what this looks like in reality, taking it from theory to applied. I, as a small developer, I choose to invest in walkable areas. I won't even entertain a project outside of a walkable neighborhood. And I do this partly because I do owner-occupied projects and I have to live there. And so while I'm living there, I don't want to be having to drive everywhere, and I don't want to be not able to enjoy my neighborhood as a personal preference. But I also know that when I invest in these neighborhoods, my project benefits because I'm also I'm investing into the amenities of the community. So what you're seeing here in the St. John's neighborhood where I live in Portland, I'm on a bus line that'll take me right downtown. I'm 5 minutes to a park. And then a little bit longer, so like 7 or 8 minute walk, and now I'm in the center of the neighborhood. There's a school there, a library, post office, restaurants, there's pet stores. I mean, there's a bunch going on, and it offers a real nice neighborhood feel. And when I compared that distance that I've invested in my city, and I compared that to South Tucson, I see that the whole city of South Tucson is a ped shed, right? The whole city is a 5 to 10 minute walk. And so I think you could bike from one side to the other pretty quickly and probably to get everything that you would need. Now, there may be some items in South Tucson that somebody might need on a weekly basis that isn't there, but that's what the small developer would do. The small developer would look around and say, hey, what's already here, what's positive, and then also look at what's missing. What does the community need? And then go about the business of infilling that or filling the gaps. And that is where they would find their opportunity. Monty Anderson, one of the founders of the Incremental Development Alliance, calls it, putting the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker all together. But if we take that theory of the ped shed, there's might be something in the same distance, but the quality of the walk and how you get there is also very important. And this plays into urban design, right? So I don't know if anybody's ever been to Italy and just walked around for hours and end up on the other side of the city, never even thought twice about it. And I also don't know if anybody here has ever gone to Phoenix and never walked anywhere, even though something was close, right? So things might be a similar distance away, but the condition of that experience makes that difference whether someone might choose to walk or bike somewhere or not, right? So even if things are close, we still need a safe and pleasant way to get there, or we're just not going to do it. We're just going to choose to drive. So this isn't all about walkability and transportation, but it is about neighborhood amenity and how our communities are designed. So I'll tell you about share with you some examples in my previous life when I worked more as an urban designer doing large scale master plans. We were brought a 40-acre conventional subdivision where every single block and lot were the exact same. And you can see that here, the image on the top. It was just this grid with the same exact lot sizes, with the same exact build to area. And this was not selling. They're running into some issues. This was pre-recession. But anyway, this plan is kind of boring. It's not able to respond or offer any neighborhood amenities, but it's also not able to respond to changing market conditions. And so part of our rework of this plan, because some of the roads were already built, was to reconfigure that block structure. And this is where the urban design came in to say, hey, let's make this a little more interesting. Let's respond to people's needs. And you can see in the image on the bottom, rather than potentially garages out front, not very appealing, we tucked the parking in the back. We put a cottage court and a pedestrian walkway down the center. And then by doing this, we were able to offer different unit types within the same block that could reach to different market segments. And then they were able to capture a wider audience. And this is a built example of what I'm talking about. This is Newtown, St. Charles, Missouri. This is like a 10-phase new urbanist subdivision outside of St. Louis, but you see the block on the top and the block on the bottom are exactly the same. They just have a variety of unit types. And so this was very important for this community and this developer, and saved them through the recession, because as the market conditions changed so drastically, they were able to adjust. So when large single family houses were not attainable by some folks, they were able to market small single family houses or build out some apartments or townhomes. So this is pretty interesting way to approach design and respond to different people's needs. Here's another example that was brought to us. This is a project I worked on. This was a 30-acre subdivision that was brought to us, and we were tasked with attaining a 3-to-1 lot split, but we were not allowed to add any additional streets because that would increase infrastructure costs, right? So pretty hard challenge, and you can imagine how this was laid out. It was all very conventional, pretty just standard, just rectangular lots. But the way that we accomplished that 3-to-1 split was to use alternative frontages. And we also made space for the community as seen in this cottage court at the top of the hill. So this is the top of the hill, and this had the views. And so we felt like rather than just having a lot line down the middle there with a house in the center surrounded by grass, that we could frame this space, create a space, create transitional space from where people might use the open space back to people's porches, and think about how that transition happened and who was using which space and for what, to make it more appealing. It also provided much more affordable options to buy into this neighborhood, but it also just created a community space where at the top of the hill that everybody could enjoy and possibly have community functions. And then one more, this is an affordable housing master plan I worked on. This is a 9-acre affordable housing. And a lot of placemaking principles went into this. We created, so each lot was laid out as it responded to the unit type. So if it was a shallow and wide lot, then we had a shallow and wide unit type that would respond to that. Or if it was narrow and deep, we had a narrow and deep house. And then using that, we created a pattern book of unit types and identified where these building types and where these buildings should be placed to create a neighborhood that responded and offered beauty, right? So if you're going down a street, you might look down the street and see a gable, and that would be your terminated vista. There was, if you notice on the right-hand side of the land plan here in the cottage court, we pinched the cottages together, right? And so what that would do is that would enclose the cottage court space, but it would also hide the parking. In some locations, we would put a wraparound porch as you turn the corner, so that would kind of hold that corner there. And then we also placed parking either in the back, or we put it behind the facade of the house, so it wasn't front and center. So these are urban design principles and examples of where it's been applied at we started at the city, we've gone to like the master plan neighborhood scale. But now when we get down to taking one of these lots within a larger context, this is the context in which a small developer is going to be able to directly affect, right? And so it's not just the buildings, right? And then we park it, and then whatever else is left over, right? So if we take a look at this lot here, it's kind of color coded. You can look at all these zones within a single lot, right? And this is where you get to become a great designer, by putting yourself in the shoes of the end user. Who's going to buy this house? Who's going to live here? And you ask yourself, what would it be like to be in that courtyard? Am I just staring at my car, or is there a cute fence that acts as a transition from the parking to the courtyard, right? Because you've got the home zone, you've got a porch zone, the driveway zone, a courtyard zone, planting, where are you going to put your planting? You got your city zoning setback zone, and then any tree preservation or that might be required. So these are things that a small developer is going to be able to directly affect. And this is all before, where the building is placed, where the parking is placed, what happens here in the courtyard, what is that material? This is all before we even get into the architecture of the building or what style it is. You can see the two images on the bottom are kind of the style of the house. It's very traditional, very plain and basic stuff, but it doesn't have to be expensive. It's just wallpaper, and the attention doesn't have to be on the style. But if the site is laid out correctly, then the style is just kind of the background. And so these are the things, the top things that I would say for a small developer to keep in mind at the site level. Right? I would pay attention to what are your fronts and backs, what is facing the street, and then what's in the back, because we want the utilitarian, the kind of ugly stuff. Put your meters on the back. If you could talk to, Public Works into that, or the electrician into that, if it makes sense. We want to have good edges, how we transition to the public sidewalk or the street, how we transition from the front of the house to the back of the house. Even just putting up a fence, there's sort of a theory that your fence might be 6 feet in the back, but as it comes up to the front of the house, it kind of steps down to maybe 3 feet, and it's much more gradual and much more appealing to the front. There's a theory of eyes on the street, which just means opportunities for people to see what's happening out of windows, and that's for safety. People just feel better when there's a chance that if something were to happen, somebody might see what's going on. And porches offer that, windows offer that. Turning a blank wall to the street just kind of feels dead and lonely. Plus windows and shutters and things like that can be beautiful and just make it more pretty. When we're looking at form over use, this is kind of getting a little bit technical, so where I'm starting to use some like designer language, but really I'm just talking about what is the shape of the building and how is it laid out versus how it's used. It doesn't, over time, buildings change use, businesses come and go, people have changed their house somewhat. And I'll show you some examples here of form over use and how they're basically the same entity, they just take on a different form. And then I mentioned the wallpaper, and that's really just architectural style, and that is so subjective that I don't want to play it up too hard. And then another one is parking, how parking is addressed and whether that makes a place feel welcoming or whether it can be a little bit unappealing. And then scale, just thinking about the human scale and building smaller spaces sometimes is good. They call it the power of cute, or they call it cute as shit or something like that. Anyway, because people, or I've also heard it called the teddy bear effect, that when things get real small, they get real cute and people are attracted to that. A great massive courtyard feels kind of empty, but when you tighten it up and you got a lot more people in there, there's more of a buzz, it's a little bit more exciting. So let's just kind of go over some examples of what I mean. So if we take 4 of those, right? So both of these buildings here have pretty good architecture. I'm not mad about either of those, but you can see that one of them has a better front and one of them kind of acts like the front is the back, right? So the brick house on the left is a pretty common scenario that we're all used to, but you can see the difference on the building on the right and how that front is treated. That's where they put the money into the facade with the awning and the shutters and the curved windows. That's where you want to make it pretty and make your neighborhood nice. It's got good edges. If you walk in front of the building on the left, right, you're just walking across their driveway. It's not a bad looking driveway. But if you're walking in front of the house on the right, that certainly feels better. There's some planting, there's like some pumpkins out there, something interesting to look at. And then when we talk about eyes on the street, you can see where the building on the right offers more opportunity for somebody to glance outside and see what's going on. You could possibly envision somebody sitting behind that window reading a book, where the building on the left, there's some windows. I think the shades are drawn, but there's some visibility, but certainly the building on the right feels better. And then obviously the parking is front and center on the building on the left, and on the right is most likely around back. I bring up these 2 buildings or these 2 projects because these 2 projects are in my neighborhood. I walk by them all the time because they are across the street from each other. So they offer a great laboratory of design. So on the buildings on the left, you can see that they've turned their shoulder to the street and there's not a lot of windows. There's some windows in the center and kind of back, but the ones closer to the sidewalk, there's no windows, there's nothing there. There's like a sign on and an air conditioner unit. That's not the most appealing. Whereas the building on the right, the green one, if you look through the trees and the shade, you can see that there's a window there. It's closer to the street, and that offers eyes on the street. And then the parking is handled in a much different manner. In the scenario on the left, parking is front and center. They've paved over the whole area, what could potentially maybe be a courtyard, where the project on the right has taken that center space, planted it up, made it nice, made it shady, a place where neighbors probably going to hang out and get to know each other. And so that's a difference in urban design and site design. So here they are from aerial view. To get a better perspective, you can see that the building on the left here is the green building, the one with the nice courtyard. It's got trees. You know, it's got opportunity for residents to come out, talk with each other, and they still park it. They've just chosen to park it in a different manner. They, you know, you drive up the top side here and you park in the back. So it's perfectly functional. It's just handled different. It's arranged differently. And yeah, and then the site plan on the right, they chose to also go beside the building, but they've dug down to park under the buildings, and then they come back out so you can turn around. It's kind of an awkward scenario, but you can see anywhere, there's nowhere on the site plan on the right for residents to go hang out. Maybe they sit on their porch, but it looked like shared porches, right? But nowhere to really chat, hang out. So this is what I was talking about when we were talking about form over use, right? So these are both local pizza shops. They're 5 minutes from each other. You can walk from one to the other very easily, but one has chosen in their urban design to set the building back from the street and park it all in the front. You can't even hardly make out the name of it. Whereas the one on the left here has chosen is a building that's up to the street. You can see in the window, you can see the pizza, you can see the people in there doing things, and it's, you know, it's attractive. But it doesn't matter if it's pizza, right? It just depends on how the building is arranged on the lot. And then same here. This is even the same chain owned by the same company. These are just two different ways of doing it, right? One has chosen a suburban kind of auto-dominated standard on the right, and then the other one is in a more walkable format. So it doesn't matter if that it's Waffle House, you know, I don't want to beat up on any chains, you know, it's not about the chain. It's just like chains can be in the community. I just think that they should play nice. So I hope that was helpful in thinking about things that a small developer will look at and keep in mind as they work with their architect and designers to create a great space.
Wow. Bravo.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, lots of really nice stuff. Lots of good ideas, which is what it's all about. Great. Totally different, you know, climatic zone than ours, of course, and also different cultural aspects. So, you know, coming from Northwest versus Southwest, but very good ideas, no matter where you build them.
Bob, shall I introduce you for the record book?
Okay.
Hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Ryan.
Okay, cool. I'll go ahead and introduce you as well, sir. So Bob Vint, our local architect here in Tucson area. He is principal of Vint Architects and Associates. He is a native Tucsonan who practiced as a licensed architect in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Massachusetts. His Bachelor of Architecture with high distinction from U of A was earned in 1982. After working with various architectural firms in Boston and Tucson, he established an independent practice in 1993. He serves as preservation architect for the Mission San Xavier del Bac in Pima County, the most significant historic building in Arizona. Dating to 1783, built of low-fire clay brick with lime mortar, as well as the prehistoric Native American cliff dwellings of the Sierra Ancha and the Tonto National Forest, dating to 1290, built of stone with mud mortar, a preservation study carried out for the U.S. Forest Service. Additional projects of note include design for the San Xavier Franciscan Friary and Mission School, Linda Ronstadt's Tucson residence, the main entrance of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, the mixed-use Plaza San Agustin in downtown Tucson, and St. Michael's Campus Master Plan, Classrooms, and Student Center. Bob Vint is author of a book on affordable housing in Southwest published in 2005 by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, It is called Southwest Housing Traditions, Design, Materials, and Performance. I love that book. Since 2011, Vint has taught at the University of Arizona's College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture as a member of the adjunct faculty. His courses at the U of A include the History and Theory of Urban Design, Arid Region Urbanism, featuring field trips throughout the Southwest, and an interdisciplinary downtown design studio. And thank you, Bob, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Ryan. Thanks for the invitation. And it looks like you've been reading my website.
That's right. That's
All
where I pulled it. I was just slapped it up there.
So I pulled out one of my lectures from the university, but as I was listening to Neil's talk, I thought of a couple other examples that I hadn't included that actually might relate. Oh, can I have the jump drive, please, Nargis?
I just also want to apologize to the people who joined us a little later about that hiccup. I'm glad that you were able to join us. If you hear from anybody else that they had trouble, this meeting is currently being recorded, so it will be available to be shared later.
All right. So I have a mix of things I'll launch into. I've gone historical on us here. So let's see about sharing screen. Am I enabled to share this screen?
You should be able to, yes.
Here we are. Okay. Let's launch from beginning here. Oops. I want to move this out of the way. Let's move that out of the way. Oops, it doesn't want to move. Ooh. There it moves. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, so I'm going historical on y'all here, looking back to the origins of Southwestern architecture, which of course came with the Spanish. Well, of course, there was Native American architecture prior to the Spanish, but not much of that survives in southern Arizona. Up in northern Arizona, there's the Hopi Mesas. Northern New Mexico, there's the Pueblos. And certainly the indigenous people survive everywhere. But unfortunately, their architecture was largely swept away by the coming of the Spanish colonialists, which was their program. So this is actually, if you look at this image here, this is kind of a very romantic image by this Mexican artist, Jesus Elguera, who does all the calendars, this was like, calendar from 1996 or something, but if you look at it, it's the Niña, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, the Columbus and his 3 ships, but the clouds are the continents, right? So here's Africa, there's Spain, North America, South America, and of course, they're bringing the cross, Christianity, which really was the Spanish colonial project. Okay, we will advance. There's the guy. So this actually is sort of a more in-depth look at the meaning of colonization, the coming of Cristobal Colon, and the Spanish project was to import their culture to the New World. Hence, it was called New Spain, coming from the Iberian Peninsula. At one point, Spain controlled a lot of territory. There's some good urbanism for you. I'm right on 6th Street in Tucson with motorcycles going by. Looking to this region, Mexico, the Caribbean, up into what's now the United States, at one time was all considered La Nueva España, and the capital of all this was in Mexico. Mexico City was the Spanish colonial capital of all of this part of North America. The southern capital was in Asunción, Paraguay. But at one time, everything from Puerto Rico to what's now Los Angeles was controlled out of Mexico City. And so culturally, that was the center. Let's see, what am I doing here? This, again, I pulled this off the shelf from my class on the history of urban design. Cuba, I'm looking at Cuba. Okay, here we go. This was their program, the Spanish colonial program, to replace the cultures that they were invading, transplanting their own culture. And they had the laws of the Indies, which was their building code, basically. It's the first form-based code in the New World brought by the Spanish. And they basically were looking at all the aspects of creating a Spanish society in the New World, organizing the city, how things are run in terms of society and the church and the crown. Remember, you were not a citizen of the Spanish crown, you were a subject. They weren't here to spread citizenship, they were here to impose the Spanish Empire in all aspects of life. So in the laws of the Indies, Regulación de las Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias, there were 148 ordinances that started with the plaza, basically lay out your town site and build around this square, proportional in size to the population. This can all be found actually in an article in the Journal of the Southwest. I think we've got some editing happening here unintentionally. So these are some of the goals of the laws of the Indies, that colonists shall try as far as possible to have all buildings, for the sake of beauty, to be unified. They were after visual unity, I think, rather than, let's see if I can affect my view. I'm only seeing half my screen, excuse me, guys. So view, all right. There we go, now I can see it. Oh, this is great. The site of slaughterhouses, fisheries, tanneries, and other businesses which produce filth shall be so placed that the filth can easily be disposed of. They thought of everything. Now, again, the fundamental principle of laying out a town began with the town square, the plaza, the central space, which was a presence for the church to make itself felt. It was a place for the government, also the Plaza de Gobierno, to be evident. The crown and the cross, of course. These are examples of cities founded by the Spanish throughout Latin America, including up into what's now the United States. And we here in Tucson had a little plaza in front of our church. This was Tucson as a city was founded by the Spanish in 1775. There was, of course, a Native American village that had been here for many hundreds or perhaps thousands of years. No one's entirely certain. But in terms of formal organized town, Tucson began in the late 18th century, and it followed the laws of the Indies. There was a plaza with a church and 4 principal streets. They've all been given Anglo names, of course. This was a map actually of Tucson from the late 1800s, about 100 years after founding. We still had our little plaza. We had some Spanish urban form. By that time, the gringos had arrived in large numbers. The railroad had come to town. We were building in a different form. But if you look at this kind of figure ground map, you can see that the dark objects are the buildings brought to the street with the private space inside, which is the Spanish tradition. Now, here's where you can find the information that I'm sharing with you. If you are into JSTOR, you can go to the Journal of the Southwest, search the decade of the 90s, volume 35, winter 93, and written by Anina Verigi, who's an old friend of mine from architecture school. This actually was her master's thesis in urban planning that she did at MIT after leaving Arizona. It's really a great document. So this is Tucson as it was somewhere in the late 19th century, early 20th. It's one of those wide angle photos where the camera is on a little gear and it turns and gives you a panorama. That was our little church. This is our plaza. There were buildings and shade canopies around. In Magdalena, Sonora, Mexico, the same urban form persists, although we made a minor mistake about 50 years ago. We tore it all down in urban renewal. It was called slum clearance because it was, it was the old part of town that was adobe buildings. There were Mexican people living there, and there's a terrific book about that episode called La Calle, written by Lidia Otero, who researches the whole history of the decision to demolish the barrio. Just south of us, just across the border, Alamos, Sonora, built on the laws of the Indies. Cienfuegos, Cuba. The laws of the Indies were followed there. The laws of the Indies work for the hot tropical climate as well as the desert climate. Chihuahua, Mexico has an interesting mix of the old Spanish period and then the modern Mexican period, but they still retain their plaza. This is also, the matter of preservation. Do you try to preserve the historic zones and their scale, or do you allow a mix and a clash of the old and the new? This is classic Mexican urban environment. The private space is at the center of the house rather than a front yard, side yard, backyard. You have a central courtyard. That's a classic VW bug too. You see a lot of those in Mexico. This is an old house from the 1800s that was turned into a little mini hotel by Wendy Suarez, who's an architect and a friend of mine in Chihuahua City. She took this classic courtyard plan. This could be a plan from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. The biggest room in the house is the courtyard, and it's open to the sky. There's a covered portal, or a porch. You enter from the street through a saguan, which is this breezeway that connects to the courtyard. Then all the rooms open off the courtyard. So there's no hallways other than the saguan. And she has it laid out as a hotel. So there's a kitchen, breakfast room, and sort of a gathering area. And these are the hotel rooms, services, and there's a secondary court in back. But it's a perfect little example of how to do a courtyard house. The inwardly turned, you could find this in North Africa, you find it in southern Spain, and this is largely climatically determined. You know, your building in that era, your building was your protection from the extreme heat of the desert, so you needed a 2-foot thick adobe wall to moderate that intense heat. This is a view through the saguan out towards the courtyard. Again, it's a hotel now, an hotelito, a little hotel, but it's this scene of receptions and things. This is the courtyard. I mean, this could be in Granada, right? This could be in the Alhambra. That same culture that's coming through from Moorish Spain is at home in Mexico and in southwestern United States. This is the secondary breezeway to the second courtyard. And this very same dado pattern is found in our mission of San Javier in Tucson. That's the second courtyard. They're narrow, but they're tall, and the air rises, the air flows, and you get actually air movement. You get passive cooling through the courtyard. This is from the Manual del Arquitecto Descalzo, the Barefoot Architect, the Manual of the Barefoot Architect by a Dutch guy, Johan van Lengen, who went to Latin America and fell in love with the culture and the people and never went back to Europe. But he has written this terrific book, which I recommend, diagramming the principles of how you build in the hot, arid region. You have plazas for shade. The taller buildings are gathered around them to create shade. Your commercial areas should have covered walkways or portales. Your principal street should run north-south so that one side or the other is always in shade. You use narrow streets to create more shade than a wide street. And the houses are side by side with courtyards containing trees, shaded with trees for cooling. And then on the lower part, you would have the park where the runoff, the drainage from the town would run down and irrigate the park. So that's kind of classic urban planning in the Spanish Mexican style. For the tropical humido, for the humid tropics, you would have greater open space. Still, you need portales for shade and protection from the rain. You want space around the dwelling units for ventilation, wider streets with shade trees, large roofs on columns to shade public areas, and then streets which follow the contours of the earth to lessen the risk of flooding. So here's Johan van Lengen's analysis of what is right and what is wrong. Let's get right down to it. No, the big commercial shopping center approach, the vehicular dominated city, and the mega store is a negative aspect in society. Better to have smaller scale commerce, smaller scale everything, really. It's like, it's small is beautiful, like the E.F. Schumacher book. So here you have different forms of pollution. You have physical, environmental contamination. You have visual contamination, and it's just a wreck, right? So it does not have to be so. He's saying, architects and designers and planners can create spaces if they're aware of what they're after, what their goals are, to take advantage of a good view and create a public market on a public square, create a shady courtyard, take advantage of being next to a river on the crown of a hill, and so on. These are all excellent ideas that you see in terms of urban design, urban form for city centers in a traditional Hispanic urban tradition. Now, the other contradiction we're facing, of course, is this growing population worldwide, shrinking resources, and the need to use the land better. This is a photo out of the New York Times from a couple of years ago, Palm Desert, California. I guess it's 5 years ago now. but just the contrast of what the environment wants to be and what humankind has transformed it into, this monoculture of suburban houses, each with their swimming pool in one of the most arid regions on Earth. It's just an absolute contradiction of and collision of values. The other way, of course, the living in a beehive as opposed to the suburb is another extreme, I guess. Now, this is all coming out of my lecture for the students, which I've sort of butchered here. We'll jump ahead of this. We don't need to see movies about Havana or Mexico City. Oh, this is a little project that I designed in the tradition of the courtyard and the roof terrace house on a lot in downtown Tucson. This is some of the earliest, streets of Tucson that unfortunately were cleared away during urban removal, as we call it. This is a parking lot for the art museum. This was a project I did in conjunction or in collaboration with Jim Gresham, who was a good architect who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. I was designing these townhouses on Main Ave, and Jim was designing a larger loft condominium building. This was right around 2007, 2008, if you know what happened then. This project fell victim to that Great Recession. Our developer lost her shirt, and we were not able to build it. But this is Main Avenue looking north. This is an 1860s mud adobe, and our plan was to build in the same scale on the west side of the street, but using a two-story height. One thing we noticed in terms of scale, these old adobes are actually tall enough to hold 2 stories. They're 20 feet tall. That was your strategy to resist the heat, was to build really tall interior spaces and really thick walls. So we were going to create this little enclave. There's the historic, actually that's the Fish Stevens house. It's Hiram Stevens and Edward Nye Fish, who were 2 early Tucson citizens. That's a really great building, by the way. Super thick adobe walls, stone foundation, shutters to shade the glass on the west. Tall, narrow openings. This was our proposal to do a little cafe on the corner with a rooftop garden. That's the site looking east towards the art museum, which is taken over the Fish Stevens house. The historic elevation on the east side of Main Avenue. So it's the west side of the building, it's the east side of the street, the historic structures, and there's our proposed townhomes. There's 9 of them. Each are 2 stories. They're joined. There's something that Neil mentioned. We're going to see more attached buildings. And they get their private space with roof terraces on the 2nd story. And actually what we've proposed here is that you notice how there's a drop-off in the land from Main Avenue down to the floodplain of the river. People can drive in beneath their houses and walk up from beneath. There's actually the lower level plan. You'd pull in below, and then you'd come up this stairway here onto your public floor, continue up the stairway. You have 3 bedrooms upstairs and 2 baths, and then a roof terrace on the corner overlooking the street. So here's a computer model of what that might look like. Shared walls, and then the outdoor space would be modulated with plants and canvas shade structures. But that's one thing, if you're going to do a higher density housing, you definitely need to provide for private outdoor space. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, that project was a project only, but I'd like to build it someday when we recover. So that's actually a stopping point for this presentation. I did have a couple other examples that we could look at, but why don't we stop and have some discussion now, since we're, again, at a stopping point.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Bob.
You're welcome.
I'm thinking about how we move the city of South Tucson forward, and I'm wondering what kinds of concerns they have as far as the built environment and how design impacts the city for better or worse.
Ryan, this is Lydia Aranda from CPLC, and that was a great question. That was pretty similar to what was going through my head. So I look forward to whatever the responses might be.
What was that question again, Ryan? Say it again. Say that again. I couldn't barely can hear you.
Okay, my bad. So while we've got some really fantastic historical basis and context that Bob has given us, and we've got the projects that Neil has shared and the elements that he shared, I'm thinking about how we advance the city of South Tucson. And, you know, the whole purpose of this is that we adjust our zoning code to allow for small scale development. So what will the zoning and the urban design mean for better or for worse in the city of South Tucson?
Ryan, hey, this is Mick. I think that the bottom line, I think it's easier to adjust the zoning code to remove barriers than it is to encourage small developers to pursue these kinds of things in the city. The bottom line, I mean, everything that we've been doing these last months has been directed at educating small developers, encouraging small developers to move in these directions. And I think that's the real challenge and the real mission. Neil may disagree with me, but I think that making zoning code changes is manageable. I mean, we can do the things that will remove some of the obvious barriers that exist right now. I'm not terribly worried about that. It's, how we reach enough people with this message and these techniques and this knowledge to start doing things. I think this has been really exciting, but it's going to be a whole lot more exciting if about 100 small developers start doing stuff.
We do need an army, and you bring up a great point that I mean, we need to keep InkDev around, or the curricula. I mean, whether it's InkDev or it's somebody else. I mean, the need to continue to train people in small scale development will remain.
Could I just say something, Ryan? I really, really enjoyed what Neil and Bob presented that I think was priceless. I think was really interesting, really valuable. I'm almost glad that we have a chance to present this as a video to people, to market it, to offer it to them so that they can see it and appreciate it, because, I think it's been really, really super. And Bob, I have to say, I enjoyed the call out to Lydia Otera's book. I mean, that ought to be a text planning and maybe landscape architecture too. I don't know, but it's really an awesome book. And if any of you haven't seen it or read it, you really ought to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really revealing. I learned from that the destruction of the barrio didn't happen overnight. They started planning it in 1938. And it was the city fathers who they didn't want an old adobe dusty Mexican town. They wanted a modern gleaming gringo town. And it was purely racist and classist and ultimately a huge mistake. And now what remains of the barrio is some of the most valuable real estate in all of Tucson.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what, Bob, I have to say one more thing about Lydia's book, is she wrote and presented that material without anger.
Yeah.
It was incredible. I told her that one time when I met her, that I was just so impressed that it wasn't an angry story. It was a story.
It's just the way things are.
Yes.
And
yes.
She supported, her argument is not emotional, it's factual. She says, in 1938, this group was called the Committee on Municipal Blight. Well, what part of town did they think was blighted?
Yeah.
Well, just by accident, it was. So it's a terrific book, La Calle. Yeah.
Mick, following up on what you said, the mayor of Milwaukee, John Norquist, when he was mayor, created the design awards, the mayor's design awards. And what it did, he was a new urbanist, and it allowed people to see buildings that got built and why they were good. What design principles that Bob and Neil talked about are showcased in this building. Why is it getting an award, right? Eyes on the street, and it's the scale is compatible to the historic building next door, create shade, whatever those elements are. being able to say why the building got an award, in a few years, people were fighting. They were designing buildings so that they would get one of these awards. And in the giving of the awards and the talking about these awards, the newspaper explained what was great about this new building. It was a really interesting culture shift. So maybe that's an opportunity for citizen urbanists to talk about design principles and nominate and maybe do an awards program.
I have
And
a,
part of the
I- oh, go
part of
ahead.
the answer to Ryan's question is answered, I think, in Neil's analysis, which is you've got to show developers how this makes sense economically. So hence his pro forma approach. Because a lot of developers, they want to think big, right? And they think, well, the only way to have a surefire success is to do a big project and a conventional project. And we've had in Tucson, we've had the trouble of most realtors automatically assign a higher value to a detached single family house than an attached row house, even if the row house has greater amenities and greater appeal and ultimately will have greater value. Initially, it's discounted. Oh, well, detached houses are worth more than attached, and we need more attached houses. And that's one thing where the zoning code can help to allow more units per acre, as long as those units maintain privacy and don't invade one another's privacy, because that's the problem with high density is that people lose their privacy. But we think, but again, good ideas can't get built unless developers get behind them and develop them. So.
Well, and here's the thing, unfortunately, most developers are not really that creative. Okay, so if I was king, here's what I would do in South Tucson. Here's what I would do. I would pretend that I was the master developer of the whole city. And I would pretend for a moment that there was nothing out there but a big field and I was going to develop it. And if it was that way, what I would do is I'd do a conceptual plan. I'd do a capacity plan. I'd create the patterns just like the two of you have laid out so well. Both of you should be doing this together and land the whole city out. Y'all could really do a really good job. And so in this case, you've already got people in your development. They've already moved in. The previous developer didn't do very good in some cases. Some were good. And then you start filling in all the blanks is capacity studies, conceptual ideas, along with pro formas and finances to show the small developers to lead them into this. Now, when they get in there, they may see some different things and do, they'll put their own stamp on it, and then keep the lots small. Don't let the developers, if the city leaders can resist the super blocks and keep the small blocks, then gentrification will be gentle. It'll be gentrification instead of gentrification. That's how you keep that from happening. But if you're a master developer, if you're a master developer like I do development on a big piece of land, and I put the infrastructure in, and I let the builders come in and put their properties in, and I let them be creative to a certain point. They have to pass my architectural review as they go. But you could design threeplexes and duplexes and cool little things like you guys have presented today, and little mixed use buildings, and you could lead them to this place. And most of the cities that I work in, the city councils are scared to lead people. Joseph Riley in Charleston, South Carolina was not afraid to just not only lead them, demand that they do what good work, and didn't let them build, didn't let them put 50 pounds of sand in a 20-pound bag. They made them do things the right way. So that's what I think it would be well worth the money of the city, not only to work on the zoning and get these things right, but to actually create a pattern book or a conceptual plan, just like if you were a developer developing your own, new development.
Kind of a form book, what things ought to look like and feel like.
A form book with some finances to go. You could have some finances to go with it.
Yeah, more important
ways of how to, where you could get the financing, maybe even where you get the capital. That's where your planners and your economic development and your architects could come together to actually lead the developers into a really creative place, to a really good thing. And then you let them put a little art to it, you know, with your artists and things.
You could also ask people to nominate buildings they love. And then you can show why these buildings are great. Because one of the things in the prior discussions and other lectures was a real awareness and commitment to Tucson's culture and South Tucson neighborhoods and the buildings that were there. Highlighting buildings people love is a, you know, very positive thing, and talking about why they're great, asking them why they're great, right? It's market research that you could present it as to developers. Well, people are saying that this is what they want. Combine it with the market analysis that we did for you, and have some testimonials about where do I want to live? What do I love? What are places I want to visit? And build more of that.
Hey, Bob, what we've talked a lot over the years about some way to identify quality residential structures in the city of South Tucson that, again, you could show people, point to it and say, this is the best of South Tucson. This is our heritage. This is what things should be like. It'd be nice to find some of those places and be able to offer it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, there's one of the nicest resources in South Tucson, I think, are the schools. You know, Ochoa School and Mission View, and
Fabulous buildings. They're really great.
yeah, well, they all have courtyards. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, I guess Santa Cruz Church is a little bit north of the jurisdiction of South Tucson, but it's Santa Cruz is kind of that is a landmark. That's truly a landmark. That's when you know you head south of 22nd into South Tucson, and that's a great building. And that's on the National Register of Historic Places, Santa Cruz Church. So I think those are some community landmarks, and certainly there's lots of very adequate, nice homes that people have built and improved themselves. You drive through the streets. One of my favorite places to go is El Torero. I've been going there for just about forever, and they have a new generation that's taken over now, but it's still good, and that's an institution. And that's actually, the architecture of El Torero is just terrific. The way it's held back from the street, and you come in off the street, and the buildings are right close, forming a courtyard. I always feel like I'm in Nogales when I'm at El Torero, and architecturally, I am. That's what makes it great. That's the architecture of the culture, that building to the street and the creation of the courtyard. So those are the things I think to build on and strengthen. Right. Well, I have a couple of other examples of designs I've done. Could we share screen again, Ryan? I'll pull this up here.
Definitely.
Okay, let's try that. Share screen. Let's see. This is a plan I did some years ago for Habitat for Humanity. Let's see if I can zoom in. This was on South Mission Road by 36th Street and Keno Avenue. But this was based on, they'd already laid out a plat with a central street and individual lots for detached houses. What this suggested was to do an L-shaped courtyard house with a central courtyard, and then each house has the car pulls in from the back. This is a 15-foot alley that would come around. You pull your car in here. This is covered outdoor space. It could be a ramada, it could be a workshop. You could build furniture out of here. You could repair automobiles, or you could build it in as an additional room. The granny flat. There's your courtyard. These are your public spaces. Your living, dining, kitchen, and then your bathroom, bedrooms on this wing looking into the courtyard. And it would create a Sonoran street front like you see in the barrio. It was and then this is a little bonus space. This is a community space, community room, and a little placita for residents of this development. This was, again, designed for Habitat. Let's see if I can close out of that. This is another plan based on 3 types of houses: a 2-story row house with the bedrooms upstairs and the kitchen, dining, living downstairs, a U-shaped courtyard house, and then an L-shaped courtyard house. So these are all house types that I developed in the book I did for HUD that Ryan mentioned. Southwest Housing Traditions has each of these house types. And so this development is based on combining those house types to create spaces. Now, unfortunately, this site, we did this plan for Primavera Builders. They were looking at the old Watson Chevrolet site at 22nd and Park, and unfortunately, it got bought by a student housing developer who filled it with like barracks or something. But we were planning this for family housing. These were courtyards or common gardens. Everyone had a private courtyard, and then you had a shared courtyard. This would be secure from the street, so the kids can run out here and play, and you wouldn't worry about them getting run over. Cars would come in on the perimeter of the development, and the common space would be in the center. This is the 2-story row house. These are single-story U-shaped houses. They're entering on the street. They actually have the front doors right on the street, like you see in Mexico. So this is an example of how you could take those 3 types of houses and put them together to create a different environment. Again, they're walkable. They're near major streets for transit and for commercial development. Let's see. I think that was basically it. Let's see if I can figure out how to stop share. Oops. Oh, did I stop share? Okay. Anyway, just some more ideas I could send around. But again, the building blocks of a neighborhood are that whole relationship of the house to the street. Where's your private outdoor space? Where's your common outdoor space? And again, eyes on the street is essential for safety and security. So pretty different from the Portland tradition, eh, Neil? Like just that whole Hispanic of the courtyard.
Yeah, for sure. The internalized courtyard.
Yeah.
I'm a huge courtyard fan though. I was just in San Diego last week. I was checking out their arrangements. That was quite nice.
Yeah.
The way that they oriented to pedestrian walkways and internalized courtyards.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. It's a universal idea. And as you started out saying, it's not a new idea. It's just a good idea, right? So the future
That's
may
right.
the future may resemble the past in some ways, right? That we could learn a lot from all the thousands of years that people have developed building
Yeah,
types.
I think there's a nuance on the word walkable neighborhoods, right? Because we talk about a lot of these options, these housing options beyond a single family house that maybe get into just, a medium scale density, where I guess the word is missing middle housing. But when we talk about these unit types, it's not like, the way that the building is designed and it relates to the street does encourage the appeal of the walking. But I think there's a nuance in there that on an aggregate, those densities start to support the neighborhood businesses because now you have more people going to the restaurants and the shops. And now a business can be there. And because the business is there, makes it walkable because now there's somewhere to go walk to.
Right. And the people who live in that medium density housing, they're the customers for those new businesses. Right?
Yep. So we've been calling it livable density.
Do you mind if I present?
You have something to say, Ryan?
I was waiting for this presentation today, and I just
Go for
started
it.
building a PowerPoint.
Go for it.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So I was just looking. You were just talking about the density portion. I'm thinking about our street networks. And South Tucson has a really fantastic street network. You can have higher densities, but if the street network is broken, then that's just one of the many necessary but insufficient things for making good urbanism. And so if we didn't have this great street network that we have in Tucson, well, people wouldn't be walking around anywhere, or people would be forced to be walking in an environment that was that would be more inhospitable or less hospitable. And I just stole some of these things off of City Beautiful. It's a YouTube channel. But these are the the 4 elements that basically created the grid, which is that we see basically across America. And that was all based on the making of money is the bottom line, except for the influential examples. The grid goes back into 1600s or something like that. But otherwise, you know, going back to some of Bob's other points, it's that colonization thing, manifest destiny. This is the grid plan for that kind of setup. But then later on, post-war, we, by the powers invested in HUD using FHA, we basically told developers how the neighborhoods were going to be laid out. And that was combined with the mandates from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And they had these 3 different things that they put in that resulted in the loop and cul-de-sac kind of setup. And if we compare these 2 networks, the one that you see on the right is an existing place in the Tucson area. On the left is South Tucson. And we evaluate them for their walkability. We can see that in order to travel a straight line distance of a little over 900 feet in South Tucson, you would have to walk about 1,500 feet. Whereas if you were trying to travel that same straight line distance in a less walkable sprawling pattern, you would have to walk 3/4 of a mile. And this is pretty much all that. This is as far as I got with my presentation. But the last thing is what I think South Tucson is worried about is the gentrification issue moving forward. And how do we talk about, what's the right scale of buildings and what does the zoning stand for? Monty had a great point. We want to preserve our small lots and not combine them together. And this is one of the projects that we're seeing in our downtown area, and we're eliminating the eyes on the street, and we're using subdivision parking standards in an environment that didn't have those that parking capacity when these parking standards were invented. And so now we're going to be injecting suburban parking standards into an urban space in the downtown Tucson area. This building is much larger than the ones that surround it. You can see that white line is the comparable size of some downtown 2-story buildings. And so we're pushing the heights up with this building, and we're separating the people who live in the top of the building from the ground floor or from where the pedestrians would be, and we're separating them by all those cars. So without sharing any positive examples, I was really just wanting to look at what our street network examples were. So,
Well, I think the best way to limit gentrification, you can't, of course, eliminate it, but you can limit it, is to build more affordable housing. Build affordable housing for the people who live there already and for their children, so they don't have to get forced out of the neighborhood. And build good quality, high density, low rise, courtyard based, roof terrace based family housing. And that will resist the rising tide of gentrification. But it's that requires lots of other things to happen. I know there's now, Neil, have you ever done any of the low-income housing tax credit type projects, the so-called LIHTCs?
I have not, no.
They also tend to trend large, because, so I don't know, there's got to be a more, again, human scaled, a human scale developer will make human scale developments, right? And the big boys will make inhumane and inhuman developments like what's happening around a lot of Tucson, unfortunately. But hopefully South Tucson can avoid that fate. We're just getting engulfed and devoured up here. My little office on 6th Street was built in 1928. It's a little storefront designed by a locally renowned architect, Josiah Jostler. So I have a Jostler. But it's got an 8-story wood frame student housing building looming over it now, completely out of scale. And the whole feel of this area, the 4th Avenue area, is being altered beyond recognition, with basically out of scale, unsympathetic development, but it's being done by big out of town entities. There's these huge housing, there's my little building before the deluge. Actually, there was a nice adobe building on the corner that got torn down to allow the new development. So that was a loss of historic street front. But these are large national, even international investment companies. They park dollars, and some of their
Real estate investment trust, yeah.
Yeah, they're investment trusts, and they have money from all over the world. They have money from from the Middle East. There's, oil barons with extra millions who want to park it somewhere. There's Chinese investment. And so Tucson's being made over by a massive foreign investment. And they look at, what they do is they look at middle-sized American cities with large state universities where the university hasn't provided enough student housing, and they plunk down these 10, 11, 12-story housing towers, and know that they'll fill with 50,000 students at the state university. It's a formula, and then they know they'll get their return on their investment. But it's just the scale of it. It's just massive.
It's financial architecture. It's not town building. It's solely designed for finance. It's not a town.
Right.
Odd things, and all the tax credits and all the grants and all that stuff causes oddball things to come up on the earth.
Yeah.
If you didn't have any of that, and you had to do it like we used to a long time ago, you would have small scale. So
Yeah.
we actually have the policy. Cities are setting the policy that makes this happen. We're actually designing this in our policies, and it's being designed by these financial architects.
Right. And it's a giveaway ultimately, because all the rents that are paid in these student housing towers leave Tucson. They don't stay here. They go to Chicago. They go to somewhere in Florida. So I don't even see these buildings as architecture. I see them as vacuum cleaners to suck rent out of the Tucson economy and take it to all these big cities back east, which are big, prosperous cities. And it's one reason Tucson. This is actually something my old buddy Jody Gibbs used to say. Tucson has been a colony ever since the Spanish showed up. He strays a little bit on the side of cynicism, but when I see this stuff happening economically, I'd say we're still a colony. We're being colonized by these big investors out of Chicago, and campus acquisitions. It's a nice, friendly name for your local developer.
Think about this for a minute. Think about okay, you can't take a lot of fees. You can't pay all the brokers and the deal makers and the fund managers and all this stuff unless you have a big project. So you have a fund manager, broker, developer, financial architect in Tucson who's building a project, leasing it up and selling it to the Ohio State Teacher Pension Fund. So you got two brokers, basically two deal makers, two guys making millions, trading funds, screwing the teachers in Ohio and screwing the locals. That's what's happening. It happens all over. I mean, in Dallas today, the Dallas Police and Fire Pension Fund is broke. Okay, $1 billion upside down because of this kind of work.
Wow.
$1 billion upside down.
Oh gosh, you know what? I think their funds were tied up in that project that Ryan just showed, the 75 Broadway. I remember hearing that the Dallas Police and Fire Pension Fund was tied up in that.
And the police and firemen, they have nothing about this. They just hired some guy who got paid by doing deals. They didn't care about if they're good deals or not. They just wanted to do deals so they could make millions of dollars. So it's really ugly. The system that we have in place is really ugly. And if you could do two things: limit the size of the lots, limit the heights of the buildings, make sure they have good urban form, and limit the size of the restaurants so they don't mess up all the parking bleeding into the neighborhoods. So, small boutique restaurants, you don't even need any parking, but if you have a 5,000 square foot restaurant with a bar, it's going to cause parking problems in the neighborhood, So if you just limited those things, we could create really, really smart, good projects. So it takes the city council though that's got to do it though. City council has to decide this is what we're going to do. We're going to resist the temptation of the whatever the name of that student housing group you said was. We're going to resist.
Yeah.
Campus-
We have a lot of it historic precedent, but it's kind of just trying to move back from low rise, high dense, moving back to low rise, high density from
Try
low
to
rise,
get
low
all
density.
developers to build something right away because politically it's a lot easier to say, and people are already doing this. And here are the buildings that people love that are like this. And this restaurant just did this. If there's no examples, and there are examples of the other stuff, it's a lot harder for politically to say, we'll stop what's happening and we'll bet on the stuff that you tell us is coming, but we haven't seen.
So I think Monty's point really is a good one. If you limit the size of the lots and you limit the size of the buildings, the height of the buildings, the big boys aren't going to be interested. They're just.
Are you going to get fought at council? Are you going to get fought at trying to adopt those regulations? Those guys are going to be watching what's happening. So I don't know what your experience has been in with zoning changes, but some places you're going to get pushed. So,
Robert, I mean, Bob, you and Ryan and Mick or others like you have to start building it yourself. You have to start doing it. Ryan's, Ryan's trying to, work on doing some stuff, but that's that's why Incremental Development Alliance exists today, to create this new kind of, it's not a new developer. We're really an old developer. We're the old town builders, with this 1 to 3 story buildings, the old town builders, that were also, ranchers, and we were attorneys, we were architects, planners. We were doing the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. They were doing the buildings.
Well, it may be that South Tucson is lucky that it has not attracted the kind of attention from developers that nothing's happening there. It's a clean slate. There's an opportunity for lots of stuff to happen because the big boys have not at all expressed interest in South Tucson for 10, 12, 15 years. If we can encourage and train young developers to go to work, I think it's possible. Maybe South Tucson is lucky that it's so poor, lucky that it's so forgotten, because there are opportunities there.
I think you're right, Mick. I think you're right.
Good point.
all right.
Cool. Well, we were scheduled to 4:30, so I suppose we can end it here unless anybody has anything else they'd like to share. I'd like to thank you, Bob, for joining us today. This is going to go into the books, and people can look back on it, and we can reflect in what changes we make to our code.
Really appreciate the invitation. It's great to meet you all, and great discussing with you, and hope to follow up later and see some results from all of these ideas. It all begins with the ideas.
I'll be
So Bob
bugging
and
you
Neil,
for your
one more time,
services.
Bob and Neil, one more time, thank you. Really, really excellent. Really an excellent presentation.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia.